Thanks, everybody. And so we're going to get started on this since it is all about airports. Why not talk about operating your airplane at the airport? So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we can get ourselves started. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is operating the airplane on the ground. Obviously, we want to thank our sponsors. And to do that, we want to say that you're going to, this is our sponsor for this particular event. And Precise Flight is giving away an oxygen system. That's quite a good one. So if you're not a member of Cal Pilots, it's a good time to join, because that'd be a great $35 investment to get a system that's worth hundreds. So we thank Precise Flight very much for contributing that. So we're going to be talking, I'll give you a little bit about my background. I've flew for Delta Airlines for about 29 years. I retired as a captain on the 737 recently. And just that's a little bit about my background there. You can see also I'm an owner of a Bonanza, so I do fly like a real pilot too. And so that's a picture of that right there. I was not ready to give up on my commercial flying. I didn't want to turn in my my commercial spurs, so I decided, even though I had to retire from Delta, to fly for JSX. So that's where I am now. As you can see, it's they fly 135s, the Embraer 135s and 45s, kind of affectionately known as the Jungle Jet. And as you can see, it's a pretty nice cockpit. So anyway, so I am continuing with my commercial flying. I'm going to be moving through this in the beginning quite a bit fast, so I could get to some of the more meaty stuff later on. So bear with me if I'm moving fast. I guess also being a New Yorker, I'm a fast talker, so that kind of goes with it. These are the airplanes I did fly over there. Originally, I was Northwest. We merged eventually with Delta. The bottom right, you see the 727, which we kind of called the bowling shoe look. That was the paint job at Northwest at the time. But we eventually merged, and I did fly the baby bus in the upper right, and the A330. Did a lot of international flying over the ponds, you know, over the Pacific to Asia, and over the Atlantic to Europe a lot. So I did do that. And then on the DC-9, lower left, I was an instructor on the DC-9, and that was kind of fun, instructing new first officers just hired and very excited, and new captains as well, who were happy to finally get into the left seat. So that was kind of fun doing that. All right, so we're going to talk about ground operations. Why? Why talk about ground operations? It's not very glamorous, right? I mean, you know, a lot of people think, well, I'm just taxiing the airplane to go get it off the ground so I could go do what an airplane does, which is fly. But you've got to get it there safely. So I realize it may not be the most glamorous of subjects, but it's important. And it's often neglected. People just look at that ground ops, like I say, as, oh, well, it's just a way to get to the runway so I can get out of here. So it's ground operations is something of a neglected item. You know, in the air, an airplane is a beautiful, graceful thing. That's what airplanes are designed to do. On the ground, an airplane is kind of a clumsy tricycle with a bunch of wings sticking out that have flammable fluid in them. So, you know, on the ground, it is a clumsy tricycle, right? And I love this picture because you look at it. The tricycle somehow fell to the right, but how is she on the left-hand side? I don't know how she got on the left-hand side when the thing flopped over to the right. You know, I guess the NTSB would have to investigate that to figure out how the kid ended up on the left side. But anyway, so this clumsy tricycle is what we're going to be talking about. Okay. So why? Well, you know, the worst accident that ever happened in aviation happened on the ground. And no doubt a lot of you remember this, the horrible Tenerife accident with two 747s that collided, both full of fuel, of course. And so it is definitely of concern to operate the airplane safely on the ground. So if you look, some of the statistics, it looks like a fairly low percentage of accidents happening on the ground. But if you look, parking, taxiing, takeoff, and aborted takeoffs are all part of a ground operations. So if you add those together as all being ground operations, and you put those and stack them one on top of the other, look at that. Lo and behold, it becomes the third highest accident rate is the airplane still on the ground, never got off the ground. So this is why it is important to really consider taxiing as an important part of flying your airplane. Okay. There you go. Now I can tell you that when you are working for the airlines and you upgrade to captain, one of your biggest concerns is taxiing the airplane. You all of a sudden now, you've got to take this airplane that's worth a few £100,000 and get it, move it around the airport where there's a lot of other airplanes like that. And it's a very big concern. It's one of the biggest concerns you have when you upgrade to captain is taxiing that airplane. Because now you are responsible for that. And a lot of things could happen there. So we definitely, in an airline operation, ground operations is huge. It's very big for us. All right, so let's get into some of this. Well, before you ever taxi an airplane, the first thing you should do is be sure that that airport chart is out and visible. And that includes even if it's a very familiar airport to you. You want to have that out and in front of you so that you really know what you're doing. And so do be sure that that's in front of you. I can tell you now, if you take a check ride and you don't have that out in front of you, it's going to be a kind of a sad check ride. So be sure that's the case. And the other is, before you move the airplane, review what you're going to do. Get an idea, look at that and say, okay, I'm at this point here. I'm going to taxi on Kilo. I'm going to make a left turn on Alpha. I'm going to then make that dog leg to Delta. I'm going across a Papa taxiway, you know, whatever that might be. Take a look. That's part of what we do in the airlines is we review our taxi and talk about it. So now, obviously, you don't want to sound like a crazy person. You don't have to talk to yourself, but you could. There are some things I do verbalize even when I'm flying alone. And so review that taxi before you move. Okay. Obviously, you want to be aware of hot spots. They're there because somebody made a boo-boo once before, and that's why that hot spot is pointed out. Orange County, for instance, if you land on 20 left, you have that turn off at Hotel, and it's a very short taxi before you're in the way of some airliner that's on a takeoff roll at 20 right. So you want to be very careful about those hot spots and take those seriously. And obviously you see them as red circles, and you could review those and see exactly where others have made the mistake and save yourself from making that same mistake. All right. One thing I love about the electronic flight bag is it gives you a lot of great situational awareness. Now, certainly in the air, you get that situational awareness, but what I really like is what you get on the ground. You get this, you know exactly where you are on the taxi diagram, much less chance of making a mistake, less chance of crossing an active runway or going onto a runway. And these electronic flight bags as well, when you approach a runway, it starts, at least with the one I use, the runway turns yellow, warning you that you're approaching a runway. And when you're on it, it turns red. Boy, that's fantastic. Just great for situational awareness and for avoiding runway incursions. So the electronic flight bag is just a terrific thing to have. All right. Obviously, you want to know all the airport signage. And there's quite a bit. It's improved over the years. We can't get into every little one here, but just knowing the signage is quite important so that this way, if you are approaching a runway, you're aware you're doing it. If you're on a particular taxiway, you know what the signage should look like that you are on that runway. And this is a sheet you could get from the FAA that gives you a lot of that stuff. You can see it's like a little quiz. You could kind of quiz yourself, and that's a great thing to do just to know where you are. Again, the other thing along with the signage is you want to know what's on the ground, right? All the painted taxiways and what all this means. For instance, you have these dashed lines all the way at the bottom there on the right. If you were to see that, would you be aware what that means? Well, that's a run-up area, right? It is okay with those dashed lines. It is an area that's good for you to bring your airplane into, and it's safe to do so. So just being aware of this kind of symbology on the ground is very important as well. And it's a good thing to review. There's a lot of things that Yes, we all know them, but there are some that are not so typical and good to review. Okay, for instance, where are you now? Some might say, well, that's pretty obvious. Well, yeah, I guess it is. But if there are a lot of other signs around, it might not be. But the way I look at this, the way I remember it is black square, you're there. And that's kind of just a good little saying to yourself for to know what taxiway you are on. Okay, what about now? Where are you? Are you on Bravo? Black square, you're there. So I'd say no, you're not, but you're certainly approaching Bravo. Right. So again, being aware. How about now? Are you on runway 18 or 36, or are you approaching 18 or 36? Well, you are on Tango, right? Black square, you're there, but you are approaching the runway. Right. Here's one. Where are you? Now, let's say you're at the bottom moving up towards the top. So some might say, oh, I'm approaching the runway. Are you? I would say no, right? The way you're actually moving off the runway. The way I like to look at this is the runway, the stop signs here. The way I like to look at it is the dash line. Think of it like if you're on a road. Dash lines are roads where if you were passing, you could cross those. With a solid line, you can't cross. So if you're approaching the solid lines, then that means you're approaching the runway. You can't cross. But if they're dash lines, that means you can cross it. That's the line to get off the runway. So you're looking at that without thinking twice, you might say, oh, I'm approaching a runway. No, you're getting off a runway. All right. We can't get into a lot. We don't have the time to do it today, but obviously flying at night offers a lot of tricky things. The night flying is definitely a whole different thing to look at. You know, the obvious ones are, sure, the blue lights of the taxiways, and if it's a sophisticated enough airport, you have green taxi lights to guide you while you're on the taxiway. But that's a whole thing in itself. But you know, knowing that if you do fly at night, knowing the lighting is a very important thing. Night plays tricks on you. Obviously, this is one that we do see even in the daytime. And you can see those solid yellow lines, meaning I'm approaching a runway. And of course, those blinking lights are just added warning that you are approaching a runway. And unless you're cleared, you would not want to do so. Or you can bend metal, or at least having to send your number to somebody or call a number. All right, taxiways. I see people taxiing all kinds of places on the taxiway, okay? But taxiing on the yellow line is a mark of a professional. The taxiway yellow line puts you in the center of the taxiway and in the safest place. The least likely chance that you're going to ding your wing on something when you taxi on the yellow line. So do be sure to taxi on the yellow line. It really keeps you out of trouble. And now there are times, obviously, when two airplanes are passing, you need to give each other space, whether there is already an obstacle there, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, if you're taxiing and you're on a taxiway, stay on the yellow line to keep yourself out of trouble. Hand signals. This is something that the general aviation pilot doesn't have to do a lot of it getting involved with hand signals, but you do get involved with it. And you do want to know what these things mean. And you can obviously look at some charts and things that'll give you some information to tell you. There are a couple of ones that probably you may not be familiar with. If you could see me in the small box, for instance, I could tell you one that's pretty common with the airlines. You may not see a lot with the airlines, but if they were to hold up their hand and with their fist and closed fist like that, do you know what that means? I'll bet there's some in there that do know. That means set your brakes, okay? And if that hand was open like that, they're asking you, are your brakes released? And this might be important. If they hooked a tug to your airplane, they want to know, did you release your brakes? So anyway, that's what that might mean. Brakes set, brakes released, okay? Another one that you probably are not familiar with, we in the airlines are quite familiar with it, but if a guy was to hold up three fingers and do this, what they're saying is start your APU, start your auxiliary power unit, that third engine, get it turning. So they may be saying we don't have a ground card for you. So that's something that is not something necessarily familiar to the GA pilot, but we airline pilots kind of deal with those kind of hand signals all the time. Now here's something we airline pilots are not too familiar with, the light signals coming from the tower. I don't have these to memory, to be honest with you. I have a nice little lap board and it has all this on there. So if I was to have to use this, I would be able to look it up and know what it is, but I must admit I don't have these to memory. What I do have is a handheld radio. And so hopefully I don't need these because I could always pick up my handheld radio if my radios fail and still manage to communicate with the tower, and I wouldn't have to scramble to know what all these light signals mean coming from the tower. All right, now this is something I am definitely big on, is the art of the taxi. Okay, there is a lot more to it than just, you know, rolling your airplane around the airport. So let's get into that a little bit. First of all, breakaway power. This is huge for us in the airlines because we don't want to blow away carts and tugs and people that are on the ramp and that sort of thing. But I notice a lot of times that in GA world, people will really rum that engine up to get going. And really with a light airplane, you don't need much breakaway power anyway, but you do it to a minimum. You know, it's no more than is necessary. There could be people behind you, like I mentioned. There could be airplanes behind you. Be considerate of other airplanes that, you know, don't blow onto other airplanes and blow debris and thought onto them. There could be, you know, in our tie down, we taxi out of our tie down. There could be ladders back there, chocks, things like that that could be thrown. So again, use minimum just as a safety precaution and just as good etiquette. And of course, just for plain noise, you know, airports are noisy places and airport neighbors are very sensitive people. So try to keep that noise to a minimum, okay? One thing with taxiing also, fast speed means mistakes. So try to not taxi fast. I see people zipping right along and taxiing, and that kind of leads to mistakes. You know, you want to taxi at a nice, reasonable speed. And for the most part, there's no reason to be zipping around the airport. Now, exceptions to the rule. We airline pilots always tease Southwest. We call them the fast taxi set. You know, they tend to taxi fast, and I understand that. They have fast turns and all. Now, as much as we tease them, we really have a great respect for the Southwest pilots. Not only are they good pilots, but we also hold them in high regard because they're very nice about offering jump seats and being very nice to the non-revenue passengers and pilots that come on and are looking for a ride to get somewhere. Southwest pilots are very nice to us. So we tease them a lot about fast taxiing, but they're a good bunch over there at Southwest. Okay, lighting. This is one I see a lot of pilots violate. They just sort of turn on their lights the way they're going to be and they forget it. And you should not be operating your strobe lights when you're on a taxiway. This is really bad at night. It really gets in people's face. But you really don't want to turn on those strobe lights. What do you want on? Your beacons, your nav light, that's an indication that that airplane engine is running or that airplane is moving. So the beacon is definitely good. Nav lights are good. Of course, at night it's a must. But you should not have strobe lights on while you're on the taxiway. Now, I know for you Cirrus Bubbas, you don't have a choice. It's kind of odd to me that with a Cirrus, when you turn on your beacon, you're getting your strobe lights at the same time. I really think they should set those up at two separate switches, but they don't. So you don't really have a choice with that, but try if you can to not have your strobe lights on. You will never see an airliner operating with strobe lights on the taxiway. Now for a taxi, you do want to have if you do have a separate taxi light and landing light, you do want to use those. So you would use your taxi light. But then what you would do is when you get on the runway, you turn on your strobe lights. When you are cleared for takeoff, you turn on your landing light, because this way, airplanes downfield, that's an indication to them, okay, he just turned on his landing light, he or she, and you are on your takeoff roll. So the strobe lights are good on the runway because now you are visible in case an airplane is landing or something like that. And then your landing light comes on when you are cleared for takeoff. All right. You want to be aware, obviously, of the winds. Now, if the winds, I mean, frankly, if the winds are less than 10 knots, I frankly don't sweat it too much about which way my ailerons are. But anything beyond that, I start to get pretty conscious of it and try to, move my ailerons into the wind. If the wind is in front of you, then the ailerons, you turn them into the wind. If the winds are behind you, then you're actually turning away. You're keeping that wind aileron down. And it is very important. I'm going to kind of try to share this screen with you. I'm going to have to come out of this mode for a second while I show you a quick video. So hopefully I'll be able to get into it pretty quick again. But let me show you this video, and some of you may remember this when it happened. So that was a shame that happened. So that is a shame that happened. But anyway, that is what happened there when you're not careful about the wind. So be conscious of that as much as you can. All right. So that's the takeoff run, and you're still on the ground. So that is a factor. So long as you're on the ground there, you want to be conscious of what you're doing there at that airport. All right. So do you know your airplane's maximum crosswind limit? I could tell you that on my 737, it's 33 knots, and on the Bonanza, it's 17 knots. You want to know what that is, and don't exceed it. You're just kind of looking for trouble. So what if the winds do exceed that maximum crosswind limit? What are your options? Well, one, you could request a different runway. If the airport is a busy enough and complex enough airport, then you can request another runway. I have Reno and LAX as sort of reminders to myself to tell you war stories where things like that happened. But we're not going to have time for my war stories today, so I'm going to have to keep moving. But that's why you see Reno and LAX. I have kind of war stories about the winds changing at those airports. So what's another option? Wait for conditions to change. I had to do that at San Diego on a commercial flight. It was just the winds were too severe with the gusts, and I didn't want to go. So we waited. Okay. And sometimes it's flat out, just don't go. I mean, you can't. You have to evaluate your situation and keep yourself out of trouble. So, all right, let's talk about distractions. One thing you want to do is, we talked about this in the airline. We call this building our nest egg. We get in the cockpit and we set up our headset where the way we always do. We put our flight bag where we always put it, and we put our electronic flight bag where we always put it. So put everything where you put it, have everything like a system so that that you could reach for things right away. Your water, your handheld radio, a backup mic, your sunglasses, everything. Keep them where you always keep them. This way, without looking, you can reach for them and get them. So that's a kind of an important factor. Well, just a little distraction there. Okay. What about passenger briefings? When you're on the ground, you want to brief your passengers. Obviously, we do that with the airlines, and I do this with passengers too. I show them how to exit the airplane, how to open doors and emergency windows, and how to operate the seatbelts. And I explain to them, look, don't be alarmed. Just like the airlines, I have to brief you on all these safety procedures. And I have this little evacuation form in my airplane so that people could see it and they know, okay, who evacuates first. And so just keep in mind, if you have an emergency on the ground, you may have an evacuation situation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, so brief those things for passengers. You do want them, if you happen to be incapacitated, if you bump your head on a landing roll or a takeoff roll, you want them to be able to get out on their own. Okay. So along with distractions, limit additional activity when you're taxiing. Don't run up on the way to the run-up area. Okay? It's not a good idea to do that. Again, it's not good because now you're going to be riding your brakes anyway if you're running your engine up that high, and you're making more noise, and you're blowing it on other airplanes. It's just not a good idea. Limit your head down. You know, a lot of the people, I see them loading the GPS on their way to the run-up area. Yeah, you know, it's probably a bad idea to do that. It's a good way. It's kind of the same thing. Don't text and drive, right? And, you know, if you're loading your GPS while you're moving that airplane, you're just setting yourself up for trouble. Where you could, and there's even been accidents where people with their head down ran into airplanes in front of them. So load your GPS in the run-up area while the airplane is stopped and your brakes are set. And advise your passengers about a sterile cockpit. You know, we below 10,000 feet in the airlines, we don't talk about anything but the airline operation. So you want to be sure, and I'm going to have to take you into another thing too. I'm a big, aircraft systems are tough for me to remember, but I can remember every single line of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. So this is what you may have to say to your passenger.
Through winding roads, past the green meadows and down shady lanes. Shut up. Shut up. Oh, I cite me. You don't think I'm the kind that would keep laughing. Some people never know when to stop. When I'm told to shut up, I shut up. Shut up, shut up.
I love those cartoons. But anyway, so that's another thing that you got to be careful about is getting distracted. Oops, I gotta eliminate that. Oh, we don't want to see more cartoons than we're bargaining for. So let me go back to the slideshow from the current one. So anyway, you got to be aware that the passengers are a distraction, and they're a big distraction. So don't let that happen. All right. Again, I talked about this earlier. Before you taxi, airline crews, before they taxi, they review the route and talk about it. So both are on the same page. They understand exactly what is expected, and both have their heads up. And you want a first officer. I've had first officers do some very good things with their head up and, you know, being aware of taxiing and possible, hazards and things like that. So, but you are it in a general aviation airplane. You're pretty much it. So you've got to be the one with your head up, and you already reviewed the taxi so that you're not surprising yourself in the process. So here's a typical one from Chino. I'm always getting gas at Flying Tigers, and I need to know the taxi route. And part of it is I'm going to be crossing a runway, and that's always a big distraction. Remember, when you get a clearance, you have to say the whole thing in one shot with your call sign. So, you know, don't be this guy. Taxi runway 26 via Mike, Delta Alpha, cleared runway 21. 26 right, via Mike, Delta Alpha, Cessna 39 Echo. Cleared to cross runway 21. Roger, cleared to cross runway 21. I need the call sign. Roger, 39 Echo. You're driving them crazy. I need it all at once. Okay, you got to read the whole clearance back to them with your call sign. So be a professional, read it all back to them with the crossing, clearance to cross a runway with your call sign, all in one transmission. Don't drive ATC crazy. Okay, I'm going to have to go real quick with this. This is Kennedy Airport. We were cleared to runway 22 from where that red spot is, 22 right. Now you'd think we'd come out and turn left, wouldn't you? Well, we were cleared. Here's what we were cleared to do. Go all the way around the whole airport, all the way around. And that was our clearance. We were number 43 for takeoff. So this is something about expectation bias. Here's Kennedy, a different spot on Kennedy, but this is very often what Kennedy Airport looks like, just lined up, waiting to go for a long time. So, but you got to be careful in this situation that you're not doing what you expect, but you're doing what you're cleared to do. One thing that we always do with the airlines, and I do this with light airplanes, clear left, clear right, and also finals clear. So when I'm crossing a taxiway, I look and I say clear left, clear right, and before I taxi across or onto a runway, I say finals clear, and I do this out loud. I say it out loud. Again, expectation bias. I won't be able to get into this whole thing, but this is a crew that was cleared. Normally, crews go right up here and take off on runway 22 left at Detroit. Unfortunately, 22 left was closed, and this group was cleared to taxi over to 22 right. And unfortunately, they did what they usually do. And as they were crossing this runway, unfortunately, an airplane was landing on the other runway. And so they ended up on a runway while an airplane was landing. Luckily, it was landing this way and it turned off early enough where that wasn't the factor, but it certainly could have been a tragedy. So careful of expectation bias. Okay, again, on the ground, you could have emergencies. Let's say you have an engine fire, okay? Well, what's gonna happen? You're gonna wanna shut down, and you may very likely, if you have a fire, you're gonna evacuate the airplane. So you wanna be aware of what the procedures are. I like to keep the classic emergencies in front of me. You know, that's very nice if you have it in your pilot operating handbook, but do you really want to start scrambling and looking this up? So I have the more typical emergencies right on my lap, and so I can get to them very quickly if I need to. But so this is part of what you'd want to do. Okay, so let's say in this case you have an emergency where on the ground roll you have an engine failure. So you're going to go throttle closed, brake maximum, fuel selector valve to off. And now one of the procedures in this emergency checklist is battery and alternator switch off. Well, when you do that, what do you not have? You got to give this some thought. Anybody thinking about what they don't have after they do that? What you don't have is you don't have radios, right? So if you were to do this, if you were to abort the takeoff, before you go ahead and shut down the battery and alternator, you might want to really quickly say, you know, whatever your aircraft number is, aborting the takeoff, roll the trucks, shutting off the radios, boom, and then you do it. Okay, now they're rolling the trucks, and so if you have any kind of fire or something like that going on, it's already in progress. Okay. And again, like I said, if you're on the ground, you may very well need to evacuate, and so you want to be well aware of how to evacuate the aircraft. All right, I'm going to do a couple of things. I had a couple of quizzes here. I had a lot more of them, but I wanted to go through just a few, just to review some of the things. I thought some of them are kind of interesting. Okay, so you're located on what? And you're going to have to quiz yourself at home, but if you recall, what I said was black square, you're there. So if you're here, you're on Bravo, but you're about to cross Foxtrot, kind of on a dog leg. You could be making a right-hand turn onto Sierra, and it's a little tricky. You could see that Foxtrot also sort of diagonally crosses that intersection. So you want to be aware that if you were cleared, let's say you were cleared Bravo Foxtrot, that you don't make that sharp left turn because you'd end up on Sierra, right? All right. How about this one? So you're what are you doing right now? If you see this kind of symbology on the ground, where are you? Are you approaching runway hold line? Are you on a low visibility taxi route? Have you just exited the taxiway, or are you not sure? And if you want to quiz yourself and kind of answer to yourself, that's an indication that you are actually coming up and you're approaching a runway. All right. Which of these signs would indicate to you that you are approaching a runway? Would the number one blinking lights do that? Would the extra dashed lines on the taxiway do that? Would the red sign indicating a runway, would that do that? And how about there at the bottom left, black square, you're there, you're on Charlie, but are you approaching a runway? And then finally on number 5, does that indicate that you are approaching a runway or are you exiting a runway? And in this case, all of these symbols do indicate that you are approaching a runway. So every one of these are something that you want to think about with caution. Okay, I kind of like this one. This is an interesting one. Okay, so your taxi clearance is along the blue line, runway 36. So at what locations will ATC issue either a hold short instruction or a crossing clearance? So there you are, you're the pink airplane. So would they have to issue you a crossing clearance at A? Would they have to issue you a crossing clearance at B? Would they have to issue one at C? And would they have to issue one at D? Now, so give this a little thought. Now, obviously, crossing a runway with the new taxi clearances, you would need to get a specific clearance to cross runway 32 right at A over there. Okay, so you got cleared to cross there. Would you need another clearance to cross at B? Yes, you would. Okay, and then there you are at C. There's another runway to cross. Okay? And now if they said cleared to cross runway 36, taxi runway 36, the question is, do you need any further clearance after that at D? Well, you would be holding short at D, wouldn't you? And you would not taxi on to 36. You would clear to runway 36. That means you are cleared to all the way over to 36 and hold short at 36. But you are not cleared onto 36. You would switch to tower, obviously, and you would wait for clearance. You'd indicate you're ready, or if they just told you monitor tower, you wouldn't say anything. And then you would simply get your clearance onto 36 for either line up and wait or for cleared for takeoff. Okay. How about this one? While taxiing at a towered airport, you come to this sign and marking. What would you do? So would you stop unless given specific clearance from ATC to cross? Would you proceed unless the weather is less than 800 foot or 2 miles visibility? Or would you proceed unless specifically instructed to stop by ATC? Or are you not sure? So give that some thought for a couple of seconds. What would you feel that your responsibility is at this point? And I'll tell you that this is, if you're not familiar, this is the Cat 2 hold area, the ILS hold area. And unless you were specifically told that you had to hold short of this area, you would be able to continue to taxi. So in this case, most likely you were cleared to taxi to the active runway. And this is the ILS hold short, and only in bad weather. And it looks like it's a pretty nice day out there. So you would not likely be told to hold short of this. You would be able to taxi all the way up to the hold short line. Okay, and there you can see it from the aerial view, where the Cat 2 hold area for the ILS. And obviously that's there so that you don't interfere with the signal coming from the localizer and glide slope. Okay, how about this one? You've been cleared for takeoff on runway 30. Considering all these visual cues, what would you do? So what are the visual cues here that you have? Well, you've obviously got the runway. You have the lines indicating that you could take off from that area. They're not chevrons, so you're good there. But so what's the answer? Take off. It's the displaced threshold. Taxi up to the white line and take off. Don't take off. Taxi off the runway. You're on a blast pad, or you're not sure. So give this some thought. If you were cleared for takeoff, runway 30, what would you do? And I submit to you that you may want to look at, and this is something, again, we do with the airlines. We look at our compass and we line up and say, well, let's see. Right now, I'm showing that my heading is 260, and I'm cleared for takeoff runway 30. So that is not a good indication. So it's fine that where you are, you're not on chevrons. You can take off from this area here, but you apparently are not lined up on the correct runway. And there's a situation like that. And there have been crews that have done this. In fact, there was a commuter airline that got in an accident taking off this way. So, you know, make sure that you are lined up on the correct runway. And that's kind of a biggie. All right. Folks, in a couple of seconds here, we're going to know who the winner is on our raffle here, but I'll plow on until we hear about that. Okay, after receiving clearance, you commence a takeoff roll, and this is what you see. What would you do? Would you continue to the runway, no distance remaining? Would you continue? The runway is plenty long, or would you abort? Well, what does that yellow line mean? We talked about it before. Only professionals taxi on the taxiway on the yellow line. You're on a taxiway here, so you should abort that takeoff. This is no place to take off. All right. All right, you've just landed, and you're and the taxi speed is you notice this. What should you do? Continue your rollout unless instructed. This is on the runway. Continue your rollout, but stop prior to the crossing runway. Stop and don't cross. Continue your rollout. This is marking is applicable to aircraft landing the opposite direction, or you're not sure. Well, this is obviously you're crossing a runway here, but you're on your runway. You can continue your landing roll unless you've been cleared otherwise. Okay. And here's an example of turning off. I'm going to have to move through these quizzes a little quicker because we're running out of time. But there's one, this one I really like. You're exiting the runway and told to hold short runway 21. At what location must you stop? Would it be at point number 1A? Would it be at number 2B? Or you're not sure? Okay, now remember what we talked about before. With the dashed lines, that means cleared to cross. That's when you're getting off a runway. With the solid lines, you have to get a clearance to cross there. So look at the oddity that this is, because you have to hold short really at Bravo, not Bravo, but B, point B, because that is the hold short for the other runway. But oddly enough, in this case, you're actually still not out of the runway environment for the runway you just turned off of. But if ATC told you hold short of the other runway, you would really have to stop prior to that first group of markings on the ground. So that's a very interesting one. I don't know what airport this is, but that is certainly an oddity. All right.
And Gary, we do have a winner whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's go for it. Who is the winner? Then we'll wrap this up.
Okay, let's see if I can start the video. I don't know if you all can see me or just hear me, which is fine. Paul, can you highlight me if you need to? Oh, spotlight, I like that. Hi, everybody. So this last item that we have for a member door prize was donated by Precise Flight. And for 40 years, they've been giving us wonderful oxygen systems. And what they've donated is a 15 cubic foot portable oxygen system with a carrying case, a flow meter, a cannula, a face mask, and a regulator. So that's almost a $900 value.
Wow.
And the winner, drum roll please, is Robin Shadow from Nipomo. So
Wow.
congratulations to Robin.
Well, that's a great one. Very nice. All right, fantastic. So let's wrap this up. Anyway, have your taxi diagram before you arrive at an airport and before you move. Electronic flight bags are great. Set that so that you could set it for a given speed. It'll switch to the airport diagram upon landing. With the airliner, I set it for 80 knots, but private flying, it's at 30 knots. Ailerons appropriate for the wind. Braking, not too much. Be gentle on those brakes, enough, but not so much that you're harming your airplane. Don't turn. We didn't get into this, but don't make sharp turns until you're down to taxi speed. And don't turn at a high speed, very high fast. Hotspots, be aware of the hotspots. They're there for a reason. Somebody messed up, don't be another one. Clearing the runway, be sure your entire airplane is clear of the runway. That's when you're off and you're on to dealing with the air traffic control's ground control. And don't do anything until stop. This is something I didn't get into, but a lot of people I see whipping their flaps up and doing things like that while they're still rolling out. That's a good way to screw up, especially if you have a retractable gear airplane. Don't do anything until you're off the runway. There is no rush. And for me, I get off and then my flow is flaps, flaps, lights, trim. Not until you're off the runway. Don't screw up. So anyway, we appreciate everybody being here. Airport charts, don't taxi fast. Clear left, clear right. Use taxi etiquette. And if you don't know where you are, be sure to stop. And be kind to people you meet on the way up, because you're going to meet the same people on the way down.